It was a warm day for October, and William Springer knew he needed to take advantage of the good weather while he could. Blue sky was peeking through the trees, offsetting the brilliant colors of the autumn forest, with the sun glinting off the water of Lake Erie. It had been a long journey already, traveling by horse-drawn wagon from their old home in Quebec to what they hoped would be a bright future in the American Midwest. With his wife and little ones as glad as he was to get out of the wagon and explore a new place, William went into a store to buy provisions, which just happened to include a bushel of Alexander apples. William didn't know it yet, but he would plant seeds from those apples at his new farm in Wisconsin, and the resulting tree would produce a cooking apple beloved for generations, the Wolf River apple. You're listening to Plant Connection. Life today can feel overwhelming, like we've drifted away from its natural rhythm. This podcast is your space to slow down, breathe, and rediscover the peace and clarity that come from reconnecting with the natural world. I'm your host, Lisa Cutshaw. Let's reconnect, one plant at a time. Picture this. You are living in a crowded area somewhere before the internet or cars became a thing. Land and houses are expensive, and jobs are scarce. You know that if you stay where you are, you'll probably never be able to buy a place of your own. In fact, you'd expect to spend the rest of your days slogging away at a low-paying job and never reaching for your dreams. So what would you do? Would you take a risk and move to the frontier? There's no guarantee of what your life would be like, but you're taking the gamble. In fact, there's no guarantee of what you would even find there for food or medicine, so you bring seeds or cuttings with you to make sure you can grow what you need. What plants would you make sure to bring with you? For many people in that situation, apples were high on their list. Why? Well, let's start with its usefulness as a food. Though you may not have been able to say at the time what nutrients an apple offered, you'd have known it was valuable as a food. It would help fend off scurvy when times were hard, and depending on the variety, you might be able to store them for months at a time and have food all winter. If you brought more than one variety, you could have a kind of apple that was very good for storage, another that was good for eating fresh, and another that was great for cooking. Add them all together, and you might make a good cider. The wood from the tree could be used in smoking meat, or it could be used in some specialized furniture building. As a medicine, apple is used for digestive complaints and cardiovascular health. For pioneer settlers, apples held all sorts of usefulness and were very worthy of a place on the farm. I have to wonder, though, if for some the reason to bring them with you on your move would be to remind you of home, a connection to the past, and a reminder of loved ones who grew them before. In fact, in modern times, scientists are finding that the old adage, an apple a day keeps the doctor away, is actually founded in real health benefits. Now, when I was a kid, I decided I didn't like apples, and that at some point, that was something my dad could not let pass. He was not going to let that one go without a fight. So what he told me was, it's not that you don't like apples, it's that you don't like the red delicious apples from the grocery store. Now, when I was a kid, grocery stores usually had 3 kinds of apple available: Red Delicious, Yellow Delicious, and Granny Smith. And if you found other varieties, it was a treat. You were probably at a specialty grocery store. So my dad decided that I needed to try a good, fresh apple. And the next time we went to visit my grandmother in the Blue Ridge Mountains, we found an apple tree that just so happened to grow at the bottom of the driveway. It was easy to find, and there were tiny little green apples all over this tree. My dad reached up, pulled one down, and handed it to me. Now, this apple was probably, 2 or 3 inches across. It wasn't large. The yellowish-green color didn't look like what a perfect apple was supposed to look like. It had brown spots on it, and a little hole where there was probably a worm in it, and I told my dad that I didn't want to eat a wormy apple. So he just cut off the part of the apple that had the wormhole in it and handed it back to me. I took a bite, and I knew from that moment on that yes, I do like apples. It was so good. It was nothing like the apples I had gotten from the grocery store. And after that, every year, when we would visit my grandma, it was a smorgasbord. There were apples everywhere, and they were delicious. We would climb up in the apple trees and eat those little green apples. And one of the great memories that I have about apples in our family, as I've mentioned before, it was a tradition in our family to go up to the farmer's market and buy fruits and vegetables by the bushel if they were something that we weren't growing in the garden. and every year we would buy a bushel or two of Wolf River apples. Now, if you've never seen a Wolf River apple, they are huge. They're enormous. They're like a pound each. They're bigger than my hand. We would peel them and chop them up and put them in either freezer bags or can them. And then the lovely thing about that was that all through the winter, they would become my favorite breakfast, because my grandmother and my aunt would take those apples out and cook them for breakfast alongside the biscuits and gravy. Now, one of the characteristics of Wolf River is that they cook down very quickly into a soft, mushy, almost like an applesauce, but you don't have to put it through a mill or anything like that. They're just very easy to cook down and eat with biscuits. Now, historically, apples started out small, what we would call crab apples today. But over time, people selected for certain characteristics, like so many domesticated plants. Today we have thousands of varieties of apple available to us because of that selection for traits that we liked. Normally those traits included things like flavor, size, potentially color or appearance, but also things like what time of year they would mature and how long they would last in storage. Apple is such a ubiquitous fruit that it's seen as a kind of stand-in for fruit in general. Just look at how we use it in speech. If you're reading or talking, if someone's the apple of your eye, that's something you really, really like, right? There's something you're super proud of or that you really love. Now, I don't think it will be a surprise to anyone when I say that I enjoy history and learning about the lore and culture of plants. One of the great joys for me of putting this podcast together is getting to read through old books, many of which I might never have even heard of if I hadn't started researching stories for this podcast. So let me tell you about a couple of these delightful books that I've found about apples. If you're a garden design nerd like me, you'll know Andrew Jackson Downing as one of the first well-known garden designers in the United States, as well as having written a popular guide to residential home design. He also wrote a book called Fruits and Fruit Trees of America, publishing it in 1845, several years before his untimely death. A few decades later, his brother and business partner Charles Downing released a second edition of the book, expanded with new varieties, and that later version included Wolf River in its list of apple varieties. Another great book that I couldn't believe my luck in finding was specific to apples, and it's called The Illustrated History of Apples in the United States and Canada. Now, to call it a book is a little bit misleading because it's actually a series of 7 volumes. The reason I highlight these 2 specific books is because in many ways this 7-volume set, which was published in 2016, is a sort of intellectual descendant of Andrew Jackson Downing's book. When he published his first edition, Andrew Jackson Downing listed quite a few apple varieties which were well known in the United States at the time. The second edition of his book, that was published in the 1870s, had 349 pages listing varieties of apples. Now, if we assume there are roughly 6 varieties per page, that's more than 2,000 varieties listed out. And here we are, 150 years later, with a 7-volume set listing out varieties. To me, that's a good indication of just how well loved the apple is. Now, I want to clarify that the story of William Springer's move to Wisconsin and subsequent discovery of the Wolf River seedling has many variations, and it's not clear which, if any, are completely correct. One version says he moved from New York State rather than from Quebec. Another, that he either sold the farm or gave the seedling to someone else before it bore fruit. Now, anyone who has done family history research will be very familiar with how hard it can be to nail down details like that. In this case, I went with the story supported by the sources I thought most likely to be right. In this case, that was the 2 books I just mentioned, the one by Downing and the 7-volume set by Daniel J. Bussey. In any case, we still get to enjoy the fruits of William's labor. Okay, so let's zoom out a little and look at where the apple came from in general. Let's start by saying the domesticated apple evolved from a crabapple, and there are dozens of species of crabapple native to temperate climate areas all over the Northern Hemisphere. 4 of them are native to North America. Now, in this episode, I'm focusing on the domesticated apple, and believe it or not, scientists have narrowed down the initial domestication of the apple to the Tian Shan Mountains in Kazakhstan, and the species that it evolved from was Malus sieversii. Let's just think about that for a second. Isn't it astonishing that they can trace it back that specifically? Even more than that, it wasn't just humans who selected for larger fruit. Large fruit-dispersing animals also participated in that selection process. What the humans did was to eventually fix the process in place for certain selections by propagating clones of those specific trees through processes like taking cuttings and grafting. They believe the apple as we know it has been around for at least 5,000 years, and the reason we have to use techniques like cuttings to raise particular varieties is because growing an apple from seed is unlikely to give you a baby apple tree that produces fruit with the same characteristics as the parent. Apples are heterozygous, so a single tree can produce many variations in their offspring. The only way to be sure you will get the same fruit characteristics is to clone the plant. With over 7,500 varieties of apple known worldwide, there was a huge number to choose from for which variety to spotlight in this episode. Only about 100 varieties are grown commercially in the United States, and around 15 to 20 of those make up most of what you'll find at most grocery stores. So I could have chosen one of those. They're well-known, easily recognized names, ones like Gala or Fuji, and my old acquaintance, Red Delicious. Instead, I went with one that means a lot to me, though it may not be as well-known in general. So was Wolf River raised from the seed of an apple purchased on the southern banks of Lake Erie? Who knows? It seems plausible, and wherever the seedling came from, my family has been enjoying its fruit for generations. As we head into the holiday season, I hope you will get the chance to share some apples of any variety you choose with your loved ones too. Thank you for joining me on this journey back to nature with Plant Connection. If this episode resonated with you, be sure to tap subscribe or follow on your favorite podcast app so you don't miss the next episode. See you next time.